6 or 7 years ago, direct drive wheelbases were a luxury for the elite. Experiencing realistic feedback meant your wallet was going to be demanding a safe word for all future punishment. Ow! Fast forward to 2026, and high torque direct drive systems aren't luxuries anymore. They're the standard. From entry-level setups to flagship hardware, the days of relying solely on your wheelbase to understand what your car's doing are long gone. Today, in sim racing, force feedback doesn't stop at the steering wheel. It's in our pedals, our shifters, and for some, it's even in the seatbelt pulling against your shoulders. Sim racing's never felt more immersive than it does right now. And there's very few companies out there that can embody that evolution more than Moza Racing. With the R25 wheelbase, the CRP2 pedals, paired with an mBoost active pedal, and the AB9 active shifter, you get a single ecosystem that adapts to everything from GT racing to rally, drifting, trucking, and beyond. But when the dust settles and the novelty wears off, one question remains. Is all that versatility really worth the money and the effort? I just bolted on $2,700 worth of premium Moza gear that Apex Sim Racing sent over, so we can find out. On paper, this Moza ecosystem offers more versatility than any single brand on the market. The R25 boasts an arm-ripping 25 Nm of torque and real-time force feedback, capable of delivering incredible detail and an immersive driving experience. And the CRP2 pedals offer tool-free adjustability, smooth travel, and a 200 kilogram load cell that already feels premium for the price. But add in the mBooster pedal, and the experience changes completely, introducing force feedback and an almost overwhelming amount of customization. Then there's the AB9. Originally designed as a flight stick base, it's found a second life as one of the few force feedback shifters on the market. It's genuinely a unique piece of hardware, although the setup does have some quirks. What ties everything together is the Moza Pit House software. Every component supports extensive tuning and customization, allowing the experience to not only be tailored to your personal preference, but also to your specific car and discipline. When everything's dialed in, the result is a level of immersion and realism that few setups can match. But with so much adjustability comes a new challenge. One wrong setting and you can transform an incredible driving experience into a $2,700 frustration. Several months ago, I explained to you guys how an entry-level setup can feel extremely immersive, while a premium setup can feel completely disconnected. This Moza ecosystem is the perfect example of that. The challenge isn't really the hardware itself, isn't really the software either. It's a combination of the two, mixed with what feels like an infinite amount of customization options. Take an entry-level 5 to 8 Nm wheelbase, for example. Most of the time, you're running it close to the limits, squeezing every bit of detail and feedback you can out of it. Swap that for a 25 Nm R25 Ultra, and the entire conversation changes. The question's no longer whether the wheelbase has enough power. The question becomes, how much do you actually need? Too much force, and you're fighting a wheel that should feel smooth and natural. Too many low frequency effects, and the details that actually matter get buried. With all the options available in Pit House, it's incredibly easy to start chasing settings that make the experience more dramatic rather than more realistic. It's a good problem to have, but it can definitely be overwhelming at first. My advice to you is very simple. Get as close as you possibly can to the setup you're previously used to running. Resist the temptation to turn everything up just because you suddenly have the headroom to do it. Then you can do small incremental increases until you find the sweet spot. I did find that some Moza pre-made profiles work surprisingly well with only minor tweaks, while others, particularly rally and drift, needed much more adjustment. For this review, I wanted to see how well the ecosystem adapted across 4 very different disciplines: GT3, road cars, rally, and drift. That meant I needed 4 separate profiles for the R25. For the GT3 and road cars, I started with the iRacing sports car profile and made a handful of small adjustments to suit each discipline. Rally and drift were a different story. I used the Assetto Corsa rally profile as a starting point, but ended up making much more significant adjustments to match both the cars and my admittedly limited experience with some of the more chaotic stuff. In GT3, the final result felt remarkably close to my Acetec Forte setup, which I've been really happy with. The wheelbase remained responsive and detailed without being overwhelmed by unnecessary effects. And while it is tempting to crank up the vibration and haptic cues available, the reality is the best effects are the ones you barely notice. They should support the driving experience, not constantly remind you that they're there. Road cars weren't too dramatically different, but they did require a softer touch. Compared to GT3, I prefer slightly less force, a little softer suspension, and reduced engine effect. Most simulation titles handle a good portion of that on their own, but a little bit of fine-tuning still goes a long way. For rally and drift, the settings I focused on most were overall force and center spring. I actually reduced the torque for both disciplines and found that a slower return to center made the cars a little easier to manage. Now, it's possible that might be my way of compensating for the fact that I've spent more time road racing than sliding sideways. But for me, it produced the most natural result. With this level of adjustability, I could spend the entire video breaking down each profile. But that might qualify as some level of psychological warfare. Instead, I'll just scroll through my GT3 and rally settings for you, so you can pause and use them as a starting point if you need them. But now I'd like to move on to a slightly less evolved topic. For decades now, we've been relying on the wheelbases to be the great communicator of what the car is actually doing. Every slip, every lockup, every bump in the road. It's effective to a point, but it's a lot of information for one set of hands. Fortunate for us, the pedal evolution is here, and we now have another piece of hardware that can truly give relief to the overworked wheelbase. This is the Moza mBooster, an active force feedback pedal that'll change the way you experience sim racing. Maybe. And these are the Moza CRP2 pedals. They aren't an evolutionary jump by any means, but they do offer a clutch and throttle and a mounting deck for those looking for a spot to mount their mBooster. And for those that don't have one, it's a 200 kilogram load cell brake and a throttle for under $400. So it's still a win. For the purposes of this test, I was shy a clutch pedal, so I replaced the elastomers in the load cell pedal with a spring, and I connected it to the mBoost in place of the actual clutch. And it actually worked fairly well. Outside of the load cell pedal and a nicely matched color scheme, the CRP2s by themselves don't necessarily bring anything new to the table, but the brake does have a pretty healthy amount of adjustability, and there's plenty of layout options for the pedal deck. But add in the mBooster, and everything takes a turn. This is where your brake pedal goes from being an emotionless brick to a living part of the car, providing feedback and even arguing with you at times, like that kid that you wouldn't buy a toy on your last shopping trip. You feel the roar of the engine, the kick of the lockup, the stutter of the ABS, and you get something no regular pedal will ever have. Full software-based tuning. With the click of a button, you can go from a GT3 to a road car to rally, and it's a completely different pedal for each. The mBooster does have other feedback options as well, but they kind of get lost in the noise and they feel like they're just there to add options to make it have more. And the truth is, it can do a lot, but it's not automatically better just because it can move and adjust to different cars. It's just more convenient with its versatility once you take the time to get it right. For GT3, I've tuned the pedal to imitate a boulder. The pedal hardly moves, and when things are going well, it just accepts the pressure and returns little whispers of what the car is doing. But when things are bad, it's quick to react and let me know I've made a mistake. Wheels lock up, delivers a nice aggressive bounce. ABS, a subtle crunch of the pedal fighting back. And all this while providing a subtle vibration of the engine that also escalates as the RPMs get lower to simulate a rougher idle. For road cars and drifting, I just add some travel and soften things up a little bit for a nice squishy brake pedal realism. Then for rally, I keep it stiff while allowing it to move just a little bit more than the GT3. If you ever thought a wheelbase could throw you off your game, then the mBooster is like the final boss. Properly dialed, it can deliver a fairly precise and realistic racing experience, but miss a critical setting and you become one with the wall, not one with the car. For me, the most critical change I was missing was the dampening. To be quite honest, I'm not even sure why this exists. The dampening setting determines how quick the pedal returns to the neutral state. At the preset 20%, the pedal's slow to return, which makes every critical input delayed. This is something you need to turn off before you even start tuning. From there, settings and effects come down to feel and preference, much like the third piece of force feedback hardware on my rig, the AB9. Never have I ever loved and hated a piece of sim racing hardware this much. It's like a failed science experiment on the brink of greatness. It really is bad, but then it's also so good. Basically, what Moza did was take a force feedback flight stick to make one of the most boring parts of sim racing more interesting. It moves, it fights back, it provides feedback, and it feels like it's attached to a car. But then it doesn't. I can't give this thing a single compliment without tearing it apart right after. The shifts feel great in a small pattern like 5 gears in reverse, but it's missing the grinding effect of a miss shift. It can easily be converted to a 7 or 8 gear pattern, but it becomes sloppy when you do. It's a good looking piece on the rig, but it's so bulky and the mounting options are terrible. Every redeeming quality of this shifter is cancelled out by its imperfections, and somehow, it still makes driving a manual transmission so much more fun. This thing's controlled entirely by 2 motors, no gates, no real hard locks, just an imaginary series of slots that only exist when Pithouse says it needs to. Now don't get this twisted, this thing is nothing like a real manual transmission car, but it is a lot more like a real manual transmission car than, say, any other shifter on the market pretty much. The resistance, the vibration, the notchiness, it all goes a long ways in making you feel more connected with the car, but it's completely unreliable for any real competitive implementation. I typically don't spend a lot of time in rally or drift, but when I have the AB9 on the rig, I want to do it more often. It's just more fun with force feedback. Now to be clear, I wouldn't recommend the AB9 as a shifter to my worst enemy. It's a whole lot of fun, but it's also very quirky. But if you just so happen to need a flight stick, then the perspective shifts quite a bit. At the end of the day, what's most valuable about the AB9 to me is it's a sign of what's to come for sim racing. It's no longer the only or the best active shifter on the market. But now the big question we all have to wait to find out is, when will the dedicated sim racing version become more accessible to everybody? Because whatever that is, I need that on my rig like a year ago yesterday. Now, before I share with you guys my final thoughts on how this entire ecosystem comes together with all this force feedback and the immersive experience that it provides, I just want to let you guys know that I've reviewed each of these pieces individually and also posted those videos previously. So if you guys want to know more about any one piece of hardware, you guys can go check those out. Also, big shout out to Apex Sim Racing for sending me the gear to test and allowing me to do this and be non-biased about it and just share with you guys my own personal opinion and experience with it. After I share my final thoughts, you guys might not be looking for every single thing that I have on the rig right now, but if you are looking for sim racing gear, make sure you go check them out. There's a link in the description and a promo code that gives you 5% off any Apex branded gear. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the video, this is the top shelf premium gear from Moza. And if I were going to sum it up, I would basically say it's a lot of fun, but it's also a lot of work. It's not necessarily the most user-friendly top tier sim racing experience. In terms of the mBoost pedal specifically, if you're somebody who switches up cars and disciplines frequently, then I could see this being justified. If you're somebody who sticks to one or two disciplines and doesn't need a big deviation in your brake pedal, then I think a premium pedal set with haptics would be a lot better. For me personally, that's what I'm going to stick with. On the other hand, you've got the R25. I'm not saying it's got the most feels out of any of the wheelbases I've used, but for 25 Newton meters at $899, it feels pretty good. And honestly, this is probably the one piece out of the three that I could truly say, if this is in your price range and your budget, I could kind of recommend it. I do still think that even some 18 Newton meter wheelbases feel a little bit better, but they also cost a bit more and they don't nearly have as much customization in what you can feel from them. So R25, solid. And then there's the AB9, which I already told you guys I wouldn't recommend to anybody, but at the same time, it's the only piece of sim racing hardware I've ever been so torn on. Still not recommending it, but I just want to say it's the only piece of sim racing hardware I've ever been this torn on. So what's the experience like when you put them all together? Well, at first, it's kind of like sensory overload. Then once you get over everything it can do, you start to tone everything back to what it should be doing. And by the time you finally get it there, you realize that you're only a step or two ahead of what you felt with any kind of haptics that you had on the rig previously. I'm not saying that it's a gimmick or that it's bad. I'm just not sure that for the average sim racer, all that work is actually worth it, or that it truly has that much of a benefit. If you like to tinker and play with settings, then it's perfect. If you just want to make as few adjustments as possible to be able to jump in and perform at your top level, then this may not be the setup for you. Apart from the issues with the AB9, nothing about this combination is inherently bad. There's just a lot of good options out there that make this one not stand out quite as much. Now, to be fair, that's just my opinion, and it's coming from somebody who doesn't want to spend multiple days fine-tuning every little detail of 3 different things down to how many hertz every little vibration is going to be. I want to be able to jump into the rig, make some essential adjustments, and then go racing. I'll spend 12 hours designing a part for Cup Car 2.0, but for some reason, a couple hours in a hardware control panel is just too much for me. But now that I've had an opportunity to share this Moza ecosystem with you, I can finally get back to Cup Car 2.0. Everything's been painted for it, it's all ready to go back on the rig. As soon as I finish this video, I can start tearing it down and making the next video where I'm going to show you guys how it all goes together, all in one video rather than a whole series like it's been up to this point. So make sure you guys hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and until next time, I'll see you guys out on the track.